In the late 19th century or the Victorian period in Britain, Charles Darwin, a British nationalist, has introduced the theory with the idea of struggle for existence in his book called On the Origins of Species in 1859. First, let's look at Charles Darwin's background. Charles Darwin was born in 1809 in Shrewsbury, England. In 1831, he traveled to explore the coastline of South America in order to improve regional maps. During his journeys, he collected samples of animals, plants, rocks, and fossils. By 1836, Darwin returned to England and continued his work, which would lead to the publication of his book about the theory of natural selection. In 1882, Charles Darwin died at the age of 73. He is buried in Westminster Abbey in London, England. However, before he passed away, he left the important masterpiece that would impact the ideology among the Western and American society.
Begin with his concept of Darwinism. It is a theory of evolution stating that environmental factors cause species to evolve over generations. Darwin believed that species will adapt to the environment surrounding them and these variations would be permanent. The individuals who have them will be more successful than the ones who do not have them. It means that natural selection, in which individuals with variations will be more likely to survive and those who have no variations will be less likely to survive. And this variation can be passed through generations from their ancestors. Later on, the concept of Darwinism evolved to social Darwinism that focused on social, political, and economic views. It is biology theory which emerged in the Gilded Age or in the late 19th century, England and the United States. The idea was that human beings, social groups, and ethnic groups are under the same law of natural selection with animals and plants that Charles Darwin studied. To qualify, certain people rise to positions in society because they are naturally superior. This would have an influence on justifying imperialism, eugenics, racism, Nazism, and social inequality during this period. Social Darwinism was led by two important figures including Herbert Spencer and William Graham Sumner. He is British philosopher, biologist, anthropologist, and sociologist. Spencer had a famous concept of survival of the fittest. And in 1883, Carlton, who is an American anthropologist and a half-cousin of Darwin, proposed the theory of eugenics. Both Spencer and Carlton believed that biological nature identifies the process of evolution. As a result, this theory would lead to an idea of survival competition between social classes and human race in society. In addition, Karl Pearson, who was a eugenicist and a British professor of mathematics at King's College, London, was a supporter of social Darwinism, eugenics, and scientific racism. He applied his social Darwinism to entire nation. He was introduced to Charles Darwin's cousin named Francis Galton, who was interested in aspects of evolution such as heredity and eugenics. Pearson became Galton's protege. He will war against inferior races as a logical implication of the theory of evolution. As he said, my view, and I think it may be called the scientific view of a nation, is that of an organized whole, kept up to a high pitch of internal efficiency by ensuring that its numbers are substantially recruited from the better stocks. and kept up to a high pitch of external efficiency by contrast, chiefly by way of war with inferior races. To extent, in 1900, Karl Pearson justified European colonization on racial grounds. Pearson argued that while Europeans are genetically superior to native people will eventually establish dominance over every part of the globe. He introduced the idea that inferior races should be driven out and most powerful race in the world is the whites. To illustrate, racial violence had been a problem in the United States until today. On May 31, 1921, Tulsa, Oklahoma became the site of horrific massacre since a white mob entered into the city of black people to burn the building and killed black people. Many of them were dead and the city was completely destroyed. The violent use in racism is rooted from generation to generation, which shapes inequalities between races. Because some people still believe that white people who are classified as superior should not be close or live alongside with black people because they are viewed as an inferior group. However, the fight between the whites and the blacks also expresses the law of survival. The fittest and strongest people are the ones who survive. Although the struggle between tribe with tribe and nation with nation usually leaves some sad effects, it is a key process that develops the intellectual and physical advancement of human beings.
The Tulsa Race Massacre is believed to be one of the worst incidents of racial violence in American history. From May 31st to June 1st in 1921, as many as 300 people were killed, hundreds were injured, and thousands of buildings were destroyed.
Social Darwinism was spread throughout the late 19th and the early 29th centuries because people think the idea was rational and they adapt the idea to their own social, political, and economic classification. There are many ideas that receive inspiration from social Darwinism theories. Its influence not only exists in Europe, but also impact and spread throughout the world. Starting with individuals' competition in laissez-faire capitalism. Social Darwinism evolved in laissez-faire society, where the prevalent vision of society was one of individualism. Laissez-faire is an economic system in which private sector transactions are free or almost free of government interference, such as regulation and subsidies. The individual is the basic unit in society, the standard of measurement in social calculus. The individual has a natural right to freedom, and the physical order of nature is a harmonious and self-regulation system, according to laissez-faire axiom. The early proponents of laissez-faire constantly emphasized that markets should be competitive in order to maximize freedom and allow markets to self-regulate. Next, Fabianism in England. In the early 19th, Fabians aimed to use the statement to implement collectivist social Darwinism. Fabian perspective of the period linked a specific form of state socialism with the goal of poverty reduction through eugenic policy. These policies show a complete disdain for the goal of a social society being individual self-fulfillment. This regulation also reflects a view of a person as a collection of genetically fixed characteristics, with experience and environment coming as a distant second to innate attributes. In the debate between nature and nurture, it's widely assumed that the former has a significant advantage.
Next, Fabianism in England. In the early 19th, Fabian aimed to use the state to implement collectivist social Darwinism.
Fabian perspective of the period linked a specific form of state socialism with the goal of poverty reduction through unity policy. These policies show a complete disdain for the goal of a socialist society being individual self-fulfillment. These regulations also reflect a view of a person as a collection of genetically fixed characteristics, with experience and environment coming as a distant second to innate attribute. In the debate between nature and nurture, it was widely assumed that the former had a significant advantage. Moving on to the next one, eugenics. During the 1860s and 1870s, Sir Francis Galton systemized this belief and behavior based on new understanding about the evolution of man and animal, provided by Charles Darwin theories. Galton elaborated on Darwin theory that the principle of natural selection may be prevented by human civilization after reading Darwin's Origins of Species. Eugenics asserts that genetic and scientific law of inheritance may be used to perfect person and society. The concept of eugenics emerged up in Japan. Since the late 19th and early 20th century, social Darwinism had affected political, public health, and social movements in Japan. Eugenics as a science was passionately argued in Jinserdaman's The Empire First Eugenics newspaper around the turn of the 20th century as Japan sought closer ties with the West. This technique, along with the colonialism and its justification, was widely adopted. As well as in China, social Darwinism also influenced the scientific field. In the course of an extensive series of translations of prominent Western ideas, Yan Fu publicly introduced social Darwinism to China by translating Aldous Huxley's Evolution and Ethics. Because he included national aspects not seen in the original, Yan's translation had a big impact on Chinese scholars. In his note to the translation, Yan Fu critiqued Huxley from the standpoint of Spencerian social Darwinism. Spencer's sociology he saw was not just analytical and justificative, but also prescriptive. And he saw Spencer building on Darwin, who Young characterized as follows. People and living things are all fighting for their life. Initially, animals compete with one another. As humans evolve, there is a fight between one social group and the next. The weak are constantly preyed upon by the powerful, while the foolish are invariably submissive to the astute. Han Guodong, a Chinese sociologist, promoted eugenics in the 1920s, putting social Darwinism into practice. In 1934, when Chiang Kai-shek founded the New Life movement, he harkened back to the notion of social Darwinism, arguing that only those who readapt themselves to the new surroundings day by day may live properly. When a people's existence is undergoing this process of readaptation, it must correct its own faults and eliminate those components that have become obsolete. Then it is referred to as new life. The next idea is racism. Proponents of racialism, racialism, or race science refer to the division of humanity into biologically distinct groupings as racialism, race realism, or race science. This can be seen in the political reform movement called Young Turk. In the Ottoman Empire, the Committee of Union and Progress followed social Darwinist doctrine. They carried out genocide and ethnic cleansing efforts against Armenian, Assyrian, Kurd, Greek, and other ethnic groups because they believed there was a life or death fight between them and other ethnic groups. They were able to regard the annihilation of entire population groups and the slaughter of women and children as necessary and legitimate because of social Darwinism. The same with during the Second Industrial Revolution, a massive number of immigrants fled to the United States. the white Anglo-Saxon American would disdain those immigrants and view them as inferior and less evolved. However, this viewpoint is rejected by present scientific consensus as being incompatible with modern genetic study. Now, let's talk about fascism. Fascism is a far-right authoritarian ultranationalism that grew to popularity in the early 20th century Europe, marked by dictatorial control, brutal repression of opposition, and strong regimentification of society and the economy. The main characteristic of fascism is authoritarianism, the rejection of political pluralism, the use of a strong central power to maintain the political status quo, and reduction in the rule of law. Separation of power and democratic voting characterize authoritarianism. Moving on to Nazism or National Socialism. Nazi propaganda film portrays situations such as lethal fighting in a lab environment to exemplify the idea of survival of the fittest, as depicted in Alice Lieben's camp. It is the most related to Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party ideology. Hitler frequently declined to intervene in the officer and staff promotion. On the other hand, he rather made them battle among themselves to force the stronger individual to win strength, alluding to societal thought devoid of morality or principle. Finally, the last idea of social Darwinism influenced the imperialism. Imperialism is philosophy or ideology of expanding dominance over people and other countries for the purpose of increasing political and economic assets, power, and control, frequently by the use of hard power such as military force, but sometimes through the use of soft power. For instance, many imperialists believed that it was the white American to help backward countries develop civilization. Social Darwinism was used as an excuse to make America invade Cuba, Puerto Rico, the Philippines, and lead to the Spanish-American War, which was a military conflict between Spain and the United States due to the issue of Spanish colony supported by America against the Spanish. Colonialism had an impact on the economic, social, and the political realms, even as they strove to implant Western value, Western power in some cases, undermine local indigenous democracy. Colonialism essentially refers to a government governed by stodgy despotic bureaucrats, particularly in Southeast Asia, in which the superpower nation has fled to invade undeveloped areas and make a better society. For example, the British had British residents to control over the Mali monarchy, which are the local authority, in order to make sure that the British would gain advantage from them. Furthermore, in Burma, the British provided secular schools replacing the religious school. They also forced Burmese people to abandon the British authority and make Burmese people at the bottom of society. It was a result of the concept that the British were superior to the local, as well as Laos that was under control of the French. The French has established Western ideas to Lao society. They introduced school French language, Western technology, and culture to Laotian people. It can be seen in the accommodation style in Laos that they are influenced by the Western building structure. Eventually, social Darwinism was going to decline its popularity during the 20th century due to the expansion of knowledge about biological, social, and underlying cultural phenomena replacing its idea. And this is the question of our group. How does Karl Pearson's ideas relate to social Darwinism?